Welcome, grasshoppers. Today's short instructional, inspired by the most recent Perpetual Chess podcast, Pawn Championship, by Perpetual Chess and Ben Johnson, Vishy, Anand. For those of you who've never listened to the Perpetual Chess podcast, I'll include the link below. Good morning, Sri Deep. Now, the book that we're using today, the book that is obviously not in Neil Bruce's library, Understanding Pawn Play in Chess, by Drazen Marovich, an excellent author. Understanding Pawn Play and Dynamic Pawn Play are his two volumes which deal with all of the categories of pawn structures. For example, whether you have a dynamic center, an extended center, or whether you wanted to break it down into the individual elements, such as isolated pawns, hanging pawns, isolated pawn couplets, passed pawns, doubled pawns, almost all of these categories, laying out the pros and cons, and it comes highly recommended. In today's game, basically, a classic encounter between Anand and Kramnik. Now, this is a relatively young Anand. Once again, in his formative years, before there's the labyrinth of the Sveshnikov Sicilian. Now, White's first five moves again, grabbing the maximum amount of space, every Sicilian variation. Alexa, turn on Dojo. Alexa, turn on Master Chess. That light is my signal to actually end this particular short instructional stream before the arena begins. The arena, of course, can be found in the dojo. Blue in the dojo here. You may join the dojo. You may also find these studies under World Championship study links in the Discord. That link can be found there. Primarily, I'm streaming on Twitch and adding to Good Morning Smislav 2. Thank you for the subscription. Namaste. Basically, the person who rehabilitated the Sveshnikov single-handedly was Vladimir Kramnik, and this is a counterattacking opening which seeks to control White. It was also featured as Magnus Carlsen's premier opening in the 2018 London match between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. Now, at this very moment, after d6, Fabiano chose the move knight to d5, and after knight takes d5, e takes d5. For the majority of the match, Magnus Carlsen played knight to b8, routing his knight toward the king side after f5. But in the last games, and especially the tiebreak, Magnus Carlsen actually chose to play the slightly more aggressive and certainly seeking a greater outpost for the knight. Battling his own private army, and if we get killed, Kingslayer Sloan, thank you for the raid. As we're doing a quick and short instructional video on understanding pawn play by Kramnik and Anand. And of course, I need to end this and restart the stream for the arena, of course. Was going to be quite the trick. Now, fortunately for us, this game features the old main line, the main line that I grew up with bishop to g5. This seeks to overwork the queen in two different directions, as the queen cannot cover f6 and c7 at the same time. Kramnik pushes back the knight and threatens to fork the two knights on backward d6 pawn. And the backward d6 pawn features as a weakness, but it is very difficult to get to. You're back in streaming. Thank you, Rogan. It is great to see you. So, The line that Fabiano Caruana chose in the 2018 match, however, featured a pawn on d5, and he more or less sought to seek a pawn majority in a bind on this side of the board, with the pawn on d5 and breaking through with moves like c4. Here, however, bishop to g5. The idea is followed through as black would lose time by recapturing. We're going to see how well this goes, as we only have 4 minutes left. And this, of course, this entry will have to be redone, more than likely. But now, of course, white seeks to occupy that square. Kramnik later popularized this particular position, the defense with bishop to g7, which turns out to be quite a serious roadblock to white's aggression. As reroute his knight back into the center, supporting the outpost, perhaps even diving in on these dark squares. At the same time, once the knight is out of the way, he'll be able to weaken the queenside pawns with a4 and break down b5 and a6 as those overextended pawns provide a target. Bishop to g7, of course. We cannot play the move. This is a common beginner mistake, or trying to alleviate the knight on d5, allowing the smothered mate knight to f6 check. So if we are going to extract this knight on d5, then we're going to need to cover the square f6. White, with an inimitable wisdom, chooses to give up the center and try to gain time on that bishop by attacking it again. It is an unprotected bishop, perhaps a weakness after all. Black's king is secured. The knight takes a tempo on the bishop, and now white's bishop takes aim at the king side. Black secures the king side with his pawn front, which he's been planning all along. This is a major feature of the Sveshnikov Sicilian, but this is nothing to be afraid of. As we already know, courage takes a certain amount of character. So in this position, Anand does not play the previously very popular and aggressive queen to h5 sortie, but instead chooses king safety. Once again, I can't emphasize king safety enough across the board, along with piece activation and control in the center, but at this moment, white has given up the center in the hopes of attacking the pawns that are backward in the center, especially d6, and black marches forward with his pawns. This, however, gives white a chance to counterattack. One note about strong players is that they do not defend. Strong players do not defend. They counterattack. And in this particular case, knight to f4 puts the question to the bishop on e6. And the bishop on e6 is the only thing holding down the white square, so it must be preserved. Now, however, white chooses to reroute his bishop, possibly to that diagonal, and go after the white squares at his own pace again. Black uses the outpost in the center for his bishop. He could have also used it for his knight. However, the bishop clears the path as well for the open file for the rook to come down the g file. You might think that white is in quite a spot of trouble here. However, there's more than one way to secure this side of the board as white continues to blockade d5, the square in front of the backward pawn. Black assumes his aggressive stance with queen to g5, and white throws in a very key move in this particular position. You'll notice that black did not really have the option of pushing forward with his pawns, since the square f5 is not necessarily available. It's not necessarily defended by black in any manner. So we don't really wish to allow that knight to come in, nor do we wish the knight to reach g4, which might challenge black's aggressive bishop, and the dark squares f6 and h6. So in this particular case, black threatens white's king. White throws in the privileged move. He takes f3. On their first turn, creates intricate problems in rule changes. After all, if you want to speed up the game by allowing the pawns to reach the center of the board, we're going to have to create yet another special rule allowing pawns to capture en passant. Because this pawn has gone by using that special privilege of moving a pawn 2 squares, this pawn never had a chance to capture it. Therefore, en passant is The order of the day, as Eric has pointed out, en passant is forced. In passing, capturing the pawn in passing as though it were a normal pawn take the knight. Therefore, we are going to counterattack something